We're going to go ahead and get started. It's only 3:01, but we have a lot to go through today and a lot of exciting content. So go ahead and take the Zoom poll that's popping up now on your screen. There are two questions that should only take about a moment to fill out. So welcome, everyone. We are so excited to have you here today. My name is Lomo Phillips. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Events and External Relations Manager here at the Linked Learning Alliance. Before we get started, I just want to share some housekeeping notes. First, this session is being recorded and the recording will be sent to attendees after the webinar. Please note that everyone is automatically muted upon entering, and we ask that you stay muted unless you have been called on. If you're joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute or unmute yourself. If you're unable to hear at any time and your internet begins running slowly, go ahead and turn off your camera as it will help you to watch the program more smoothly. You can message me at any time if you need any technical assistance. There are multiple opportunities throughout the session for you all to engage with the panelists. You can use the chat function to share comments or questions throughout the discussion. Linked Learning Alliance staff are monitoring that chat box, so we will go ahead and highlight key comments and questions that may come up. To help smoothen the flow of questions during audience Q&A, please use the raise hand button under reactions when you have a question you would like to say aloud. We will then unmute you so that you may ask your question. And as you listen to our panelists, feel free to use the emojis under reactions as you feel compelled to better engage with the conversation. Lastly, to share a little bit about our session goals for today, we'd like to share a framework with you all for bringing together the linked learning and community schools approaches to improve outcomes for our high school students. We're going to provide a concrete example of how the approaches reinforce each other to support students, and we'll describe funding and policy opportunities to scale both approaches in tandem. There'll be multiple opportunities as well for audience Q&A, but feel free to input those questions and comments into the chat throughout. And with that, I'll pass it over to Renita to begin today's webinar.
Great, thanks, Lomo. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Renita Guham, the Vice President for Strategy and Impact at the Linked Learning Alliance, and I'm a longtime education researcher, and I lead our work to build strategic partnerships and develop the evidence base for linked learning to fuel a national movement around college and career readiness. And I actually had the privilege of serving as the principal investigator of a multi-year evaluation of the Linked Learning District Initiative starting over a decade ago, and really got to witness firsthand the impact of linked learning on students, on teachers, and on communities. And I'm going to be brief because we want to get to the substance of our discussion. But to better frame our conversation, let's take a quick look at the results from the poll. So it looks like over half the folks are familiar or very familiar with linked learning. Which is great, and then probably a little less familiar with the community schools approach. 41% have never heard of it, so it'll be, so I just want to make sure our panelists are aware, so we're framing our comments to make sure we're bringing folks in who are really new to this work. We've assembled a panel of fantastic researchers from the field and amazing linked learning leaders from Oakland High School, who will be providing a glimpse into what community schools are and how community schools and linked learning can be integrated to improve student success in high school and beyond. Just a little bit about linked learning. Everyone who's involved with linked learning knows that the magic really lies in the and what we call the power of plus. The approach combines rigorous academics aligned to college admissions requirements with a sequence of career technical education courses tied to an industry sector, work-based learning that exposes students to real-world workplaces, and comprehensive student supports. And these pathways can be structured as small learning communities within a comprehensive high school, as is the case in Oakland High, or as small schools. And we really believe that when we combine college and career preparation, we put students in the position to successfully pursue a full range of post-secondary options. And we've seen how linked learning really ignites students' passions by creating meaningful learning experiences, and it keeps them connected to a sense of purpose, which has been so critical during this past year during the pandemic. And we know that students work harder and dream bigger if education is relevant to them, and you'll get to hear a little bit of that today. And I think really importantly, linked learning is for all students. It's really been demonstrated as a means for advancing equity in education. And so today I'm thrilled to share a new concept brief that was jointly authored by the Linked Learning Alliance and the UCLA Center for Community Schooling, and it describes a framework for bringing our two educational approaches together. And we really believe that the two approaches under one framework form a really cohesive strategy that can change and dismantle structures that have perpetuated power and inequality in our education systems. And so here with us today to help provide a high-level overview of the community schools approach and how it can work together with linked learning, we have Marisa Saunders, the Associate Director for Research at the UCLA Center for Community Schooling, and Jeannie Oakes, a Senior Fellow in Residence at the Learning Policy Institute, and a member of the Task Force on Next Generation Community Schools at the Brookings Institution. And I'm so thrilled to have them both. I've known them both for a long time. They've both done research on linked learning and community schools and know this work really deeply. Marisa actually worked with the Alliance on the concept brief, so I want to start with her. Marisa, given that we have a lot of folks here who don't know much about the community schools approach, I wonder if you could tell us what it is and what outcomes stakeholders can expect when adopting the community schools strategy.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. So community schools have been around for a really long time. They're a century-old idea that highlights the connection between schools and communities. They're public schools or neighborhood schools that identify the strengths and the assets of the community, and they forge partnerships with families and community organizations to provide educational opportunities and supports and services for students and their families. So community schools will look different. They're not a one-size-fits-all approach. They'll look different based on their local context and the strengths and needs of the community, but they all share evidence-based practices or pillars that integrate, and the integration piece is key here, that integrate to provide a supportive learning environment. And I'm citing the work of Jeannie Oakes here and her colleagues, so I hope that she'll elaborate or correct me if I get something wrong. But the 4 pillars of the community school approach are meaningful, authentic family and community engagement, collaborative decision-making that includes teachers, community members, students, and their families, expanded and enriched learning time. And that means powerful teaching and learning that takes place both in and out of the classroom and taps into the lived experiences and the interests and the strengths of students, families, and their communities. And then finally, integrated student supports that help remove barriers to learning. And oftentimes when people think about the community schools approach, they focus on this last pillar, but really it's the integration of the 4. In terms of outcomes, their community schools have been shown to generate a range of positive student outcomes. And one of the largest studies was conducted by the Rand Corporation of the New York City Community School Initiative, and it involved more than 250 schools, which is a really large sample. Mm-hmm. And in a short period of time, 3 years, it demonstrated increased academic outcomes, improved academic outcomes, including improved graduation rates, on-time grade advancements, and increase in course pass rates. They also found improved opportunity to learn outcomes such as improved attendance and fewer discipline issues. So I think these are the sort of outcomes that stakeholders can anticipate, as well as a positive learning environment based on the trusting and caring relationships that are at the core of the approach.
Thanks, Marisa. And I think a lot of people here who are from the linked learning field probably say, well, that sounds a lot like what we do in linked learning, which is partly why you and I started talking about how to bring the 2 approaches together, right? So I'm wondering if you can actually just talk a little bit about this framework and the elements of linked learning and community schools that you see as being in common.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay, you can. Yes, Renita, it was really exciting to do this, and I should start by sharing the inspiration behind the framework. And it stemmed from what we were learning from students and educators involved in these approaches. And it's been really striking based on the research we've conducted, how similarly those involved with the approaches, students, families, community members, educators, and alumni, describe their experience within these settings. So the provision of integrated supports, which is one of the components of linked learning and a pillar of the community school strategy. I mean, there's a clear intersection there, but we felt strongly that there were deeper connections based on what we were learning and hearing from those involved in the approaches. So together with the Alliance, we thought it was time to really explore the many ways the two approaches complement and reinforce each other. So the framework that you see that the team at the Alliance put together highlights at the high school level how linked learning and community schools share three commitments. The first commitment is to provide rich and meaningful learning opportunities where students can learn both in the classroom and beyond through community-based practices that tap into students' interests and strengths. So this can look like internships or work-based learning experiences. It could also look like service learning or place-based learning where students use the local history, culture, or the economy to provide the context for problem solving and their learning. The second intersection is a commitment to creating spaces where students, families, and community members are heard and empowered to shape the learning environment. So this happens not only through collaborative leadership, which is critical, but also through locally designed curriculum, instructional strategies, and assessments that tap into students' assets and needs. And then finally, a commitment to provide integrated student support so that students can achieve their full potential. And this includes, of course, wraparound services that we know are so important, especially given the time right now in COVID-19 and its impact on communities. But it also includes creating learning environments that are supportive and demonstrate to students both in and out of school that they feel cared for and are appreciated. And this graphic demonstrates how the two approaches, how the pillars or the components of the two approaches serve to enact these shared commitments to achieve these identified outcomes: college and career readiness and civic participation.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Marisa. I'm going to turn it to Jeannie, who has had an opportunity to do research on linked learning in community schools for over a decade. So you know these approaches really well. Would love for you to reflect on the framework and how it connects to the work that you're leading on this National Community Schools Task Force. How does this connect with that work?
Marisa did a terrific job of describing the two approaches and the similarities among them. And it really, I had done linked learning research for a long time with Marisa, and then began doing research on community schools. And I too was struck by how much they have in common, and yet how much linked learning, I think, contributes to the community school model when you're thinking about high school kids and what they need. The Brookings Task Force that I was on issued a report actually already, and the report was, I mean, we may need to issue an addendum to it based on this, thinking about collaboration, but the task force was really trying to imagine how schools, a next generation of schools, could really help the system and the kids recover from the COVID crisis, and at the same time pave the way for really 21st century teaching and learning, so that it could be not just a rescue plan for schools, but also a way to really move schools forward. And what's so interesting to me, and I think the reason why they chose community schools and why a linked learning would be equally appropriate, is that they both, the features that Marisa described are both so reinforced and emphasized by the science of learning and development, that over the last 2 or 3 decades, even multidisciplinary researchers, all the way from studying brains to, studying classrooms, have really, and studying after school programs, have really come to a theory about the importance of the whole child and the critical importance of relationships and the critical importance of building new knowledge onto what kids already know and experience and what they bring to school. So I think those things were all emphasized in the Brookings Task Force report, and I think they apply to linked learning as much as to community schools.
Yeah, and it feels like linked learning provides sort of that framework and structure for the community schools model to sort of enter in at the high school level. And I think we'll get to really hear that when we hear from the Oakland High team. Before I turn to them, I just wanted to ask both Marisa and Jeannie one more question, which is, how do you see the approaches, how do you see linked learning advancing the community schools approach at the high school level and vice versa? Sort of what's the thing that they each add to the other? Marisa, do you want to maybe go first?
Yeah, there we go. Yes, sure. I'll take a stab at that. It's a great question. And yes, I'm certain that our panelists are going to dig in deeper. But what I think on the ground integration of these two approaches can accomplish is a recommitment to these values that are highlighted in the framework to ensure students' readiness for college, career, and civic participation. So students, teachers, families, and community members are working together so that students graduate with the tools they need, the knowledge they need to not only access college and the workplace, but to get to your point of the power of and. In addition, I think they provide students, the integration provides students with the confidence, the social emotional skills, the well-being and sense of empowerment they need to shape those post-secondary environments. So they feel they really belong in post-secondary institutions so that they can create workplace environments that are just and equitable. And they could work towards meaningful change, creating meaningful change in their communities. And I think that is the value of on the ground integration and really lends to strengthening both approaches.
That's terrific, Marisa. Jeannie, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just a bit. We always talk about community schools as an approach rather than a particular program that has to be replicated. And that means that people locally at the school and in the community have to figure out, well, what are we actually going to do that makes sense here? And the nice thing about linked learning for high school kids is that because the basic tenets of community schools are developing learning relationships with caring adults and adults beyond school teachers, right? Mm-hmm. And that's especially important in low-income communities where students really have a chance to learn about the assets in terms of the people in their communities and what they do. And the other is to develop these very active, engaged learning experiences that take place outside of school as well as inside of school. And so for a high school to say, well, let's focus this on some sort of career theme, it helps fill out the stuff. I mean, with little kids, it's more after school activities and enrichment, and we sort of know more what to do at that level, although it's still it's not easy. But this, I think, really gives a really wonderful set of tools for people who want to move on the community schools concept at the high school level. And I think it really humanizes people who want to see a reinvention of career and technical education. So it is something more than simply job training.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Giving kids really rich experiences through work-based learning, through projects tied to community issues, which Oakland High does such a fantastic job at. Before we move to our Oakland High panelists, I wanted to open it up for audience Q&A. If you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat if there are any questions, particularly for Jeannie or for Marisa. And while we're waiting for people to engage, I was wondering, Marisa or Jeannie, if you have any stories about a young person or a school that might illustrate the impact or potential impact of the two approaches coming together.
Many, many. A story comes to mind because it's based on an interview with an alumni that was conducted maybe 18 months ago. And it was a student who had graduated from an engineering pathway in the Central Valley. And one of his work experiences, his internship was with a local engineering firm that worked in the agricultural sector to increase productivity. So they were doing all sorts of work that was aimed to improve the what was going on in his particular community. And so he went on to study engineering. He has graduated now, is working in the field. And what he shared with me was that in addition to learning these important skills, he learned how he could contribute to his community and how his learning is a part of the community. It was never set apart. And I think that was just such a great example of what these two approaches can achieve together.
That's great. Thank you, Marisa. I see a question from John, and I'm actually going to hold that question because I think we're going to talk about funding at the end. So John, I'm going to acknowledge that I see your question in the chat and come back to it when we talk about funding and policy opportunities towards the end of the webinar. All right. Thank you, Marisa and Jeannie. We'll come back to you in a little bit. I want to turn now to our fantastic education partners at Oakland High School, who just work so tirelessly to ensure students stay connected and are supported each day. So today we're joined by Pam Moy, principal at Oakland High, Rani Ath, the Wellness Center director, Elsa Tesfaye, one of the counselors at Oakland High, Wesley Hingano, a case manager, and Jasmine Vo, 11th grader in the Law and Social Justice Academy. So I'm going to start with Pam. And Pam, for you as the principal of Oakland High, how do you see these approaches coming together on the ground?
I think, well, to give you some context, we not only have our wellness center, we have a future center. We are small learning communities, as you had said previously. So what that also involves is having a case carrier, a counselor, and an administrator over that group. And I think a lot of it is the communication, the collaboration, and that coordination. So the 3 C's between all of these groups as we push on our academics, as we push on project-based learning, as we push on standards-based grading. Our teams meet, we have those high-level conversations about how does the link learning process going, what work-based learning aspects do we want to involve. However, as we're working with our scholars, we recognize that some of them need some extra supports, sometimes social emotional supports, sometimes career readiness supports, future center supports, things like that. And so as the teams meet, we make note and we do our referrals, our collaboration, and we make sure that the services are made offered to our scholars as they are seen within.
Terrific, thank you. I'm gonna actually ask Rani a question now because you actually have some historical perspective, having worked at the Wellness Center for a few years. I wonder if you can describe a little bit about the origins of how Oakland High brought together the community schools approach with link learning over a decade ago, and really what the benefits you've seen for young people.
Yeah, first off, I just want to thank everyone. Thank you all for having us here this afternoon. It's always a pleasure to be able to highlight and speak about the work that we're doing here at Oakland High. Um, so we've so my name is Randy Ath, she, her pronouns, and I work for an organization called eBASI. And eBASI is a nonprofit youth organization in Oakland who have worked with youth and families in Oakland for over 40 years. Providing expanded learning programs and working with justice-involved youth, and for many years, for 40 plus years, right? And so in the last 10 years, what is known as community schooling, for us, it's which for us is like thinking about how do we partner with schools and other community organizations to provide supports and opportunities for students, so that they have the love, the care, the skills, the knowledge to live life as fully and as healthy as possible. And so in the community schools world or the linked learning world, it could look like what you frame as integrated supports, wraparound services, culturally responsive services, trauma-informed, healing-centered practices. And so the Wellness Center here has been in the making for 17 years now. So back in 2004, students at Oakland High had lobbied for a school nurse and other health and wellness services. And so he basically was invited to come and explore the possibilities of creating what we have now, the Shop 55 Wellness Center. And so we worked with the team of Ojai Young Youth, and back in 2005, they conducted over 1,000 surveys, 150 interviews, focus groups, and with their work, they advocated with the county and with the district to be able to build out this fabulous wellness center. And eBASI was chosen to be the lead agency to run this, and we are honored to do so. And so the next question you asked was, what are the benefits we've seen?
Mhm.
And so each year we have 300 to 400 referrals, self-referrals and referrals from adults who are concerned for students. And 65% of those referrals are connected to services. And as of right now, that number is still true even during a pandemic. So we're connected and we've completed services with students, or students are still receiving services. And these services include health services, wellness check-ins, individual counseling, group counseling, academic support, financial support, food access, case management, housing, and the needs goes on and on. 90% of our students who access our service are overall satisfied with our staff and programs, and that's very telling. And as we speak to integrated supports, we got to think about it's more than just a program. You know, it's not just a separate space where you go and that's where you need to go, or that's who you need to call to get support. It's about the people. It's about the adults and how we relate and build trust with one another. And so I will, in my 13 plus years here, I felt like we've built such a rapport and trusting relationship with the adults, all the administrators, the case managers, counselors, teachers, and students to be able to work hand in hand and intentionally identify needs and areas of growth, to be able to provide students what they need and what's relevant to them now. So that's the work that we've been doing, and I feel like those are the benefits that I've seen for our students in our school community.
Thank you. And actually, before I turn it to Elsa, I wanted to turn it back to Pam for just a minute. Realize some folks on the phone might not have sort of a sense of how Oakland High is structured in your demographics. I was wondering if you just give folks a really quick overview of who the kids are and how you're structured into linked learning pathways.
So our school is roughly 1,600 students. Our freshman students who come in, we break them up into what we call families. We are the Wildcats, so they are Wildcat themed. And what that does is it gives each family about 90 students. So it already starts off as a small school feel. With that piece in mind, we don't want, we're trying not to let this kid slip through the cracks. In the middle of 9th grade year, they are exposed to all of our pathways through a series of lessons and workshops and auditorium presentations. Although through COVID, it was all through Zoom. Students then get to rank choice their preferences, and they go into one of our 5 pathways. We have an environmental science pathway, a visual arts pathway, a public health pathway, law and social justice pathway, and an engineering pathway. Each of those pathways then is led by an administrator, again, a case manager and a counselor. And within those pathways also, they have core set of teachers. So they too are cohorted, just like the students are cohorted within their 10th grade year, 11th grade year, and 12th grade year. That allows for a lot of community building, a lot of collaboration, a lot of just people knowing the students and being able to follow through with the things. So as you talk to a student and like get to know them in their 10th grade year, the celebration is even richer in their 12th grade year as they walk that stage. And we really, really value all of those pieces in order to support our scholars.
Thank you. And there's a question in the chat. Could you please list the pathways again, if you don't mind doing that really quickly?
Totally. Public health, environmental science, engineering, visual arts. I can't look at the chat, sorry. I've thrown myself off. And law and social justice, I believe, is the last one.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. And that actually, your comments set up my question for Elsa, which is about the triad approach. So Elsa, you're a counselor, so would love to hear more about the triad approach and how you're able to work with the other members of your triad to effectively support students in their linked learning pathways.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Elsa Tesfaye, and I am one of the counselors at Oakland High School, and I oversee the freshman Puma family as well as the IDEA Engineering Academy with Wesley, who's also on this call, and as well as Miss Skyers, who's our assistant principal for our cohort. And today I was going to discuss a little bit about the approach we have amongst each other. I really appreciate our team. I don't know what I would do without our team and our support. We definitely have a group effort. That's how we support our students. We make sure we're well, and as long as we're well, we're going to produce better work to make sure our students get what they need. And so a lot of what we do when we check in, we have weekly meetings, and because of COVID, we've been doing Zoom meetings twice a week. So Mondays and Fridays, we check in with each other. And Fridays, we also allow for our students and parents to drop in on calls if they want to just check in with us about academics or just anything that they need in general. We also engage in our team meeting pathways with our engineering academy with the teachers on Tuesdays. So every other week, we have team meetings where we discuss student progress, any students that we may need to refer to different programs or just may need additional support or check-ins. And in this meeting, we also have our teachers fill out a tracker. So this way we make sure that no student is being left out and that everybody's being supported. And in the tracker, our teachers normally update any notes or information we need for us to check in with parents or the student directly. And so we update those every other week. And we also update that when we receive progress report grades, just so that we can help our students stay on track and keep good grades. And then we also keep notes during these meetings to hold ourselves accountable with all the information that we share. And especially when it comes to splitting the responsibilities, because we have such a big caseload, we tend to split the responsibilities amongst each other. So myself, Mr. Hingano, and Ms. Skyers, we have a lot of phone calls to make, whether it's to students or parents. We generally split up those responsibilities so that we can be efficient, and again, so that we don't miss any students who may need support, especially during this distance learning. We have found it's been a little bit easier to reach parents and do outreach to parents during distance learning because a lot of the parents are at home with their students. And then Mr. Hingano does a lot of our community building, which is really great. He helps to provide resources for students and teachers, and he also has a large focus on supporting our freshman and sophomore groups. We often tend to show a lot of attention to our seniors and juniors. So Mr. Hingano does a really great job of just stepping into the classrooms and building that community with the lower grade levels to make sure that they don't get left out and that they feel supported throughout the entire high school career. And he also does a really great job of just recognizing student accomplishments. And then we have Ms. Skyers. She helps to make sure that we stay on track with our work. She leads our meetings. with parents, 504 meetings, setting up field trips when we are in person. And then we just do a lot of communication and collaboration through email, just making sure to keep each other connected, and through text messages, just so that we keep up with our work and support one another.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Elsa. And I'm going to turn to Wesley. I would really love to hear more about your role as a case manager and how you collaborate with Elsa and other counselors, as well as with teachers and site administrators to support students.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I want to first acknowledge that I'm on unceded indigenous Chochenyo Ohlone land, AKA Oakland, AKA the town. But my name is Wesley Hingano. I'm a case manager for the IDEA Academy. And really, as a case manager, what we do here at Oakland High is we support, advocate, and bridge students and families with all things Oakland High, and ultimately help students be successful here. In terms of how we collaborate, I work closely with my assistant principal and my counselor, who's Ms. Tesfaye, and we really meet weekly and just discuss students that we hear about in emails, through teachers, and so forth. Tesfaye works more with students around college, career, academics, and I support students that have more of an opportunity to improve via attendance, grades, or behaviors, and so forth. There are some students that we tag team, and then there's some students that we support individually. But in terms of how we collaborate, like across the board with case managers, assistant principals, and counselors, we have small school issues, like in terms of our academies that we discuss in our triads, but then we also have big school discussions that we have, and that kind of requires all hands on decks. But my biggest thing that I like when we discuss really across the different groups is kind of sharing of resources, like what kind of tracker are you using to track your students? And just kind of that part of us working as a community, and not really reinventing the wheel, but figuring out, oh, like they have a good system over there, we can just model that here in our IDEA Academy. But ultimately, I see it to be really, really effective, not just for all students, but for specifically historically marginalized students, which I'm extremely passionate about. But yes, I see that the small school model within Oakland High, and specifically the Wellness Center, which is totally my favorite people on campus, all good vibes and everything. They are serving our students, and it's just a great place to be here, knowing that we are part of a system that's centered around healing and liberating our students.
Love that. Thank you so much, Wesley. And I really do believe the way that you're structured into small learning communities through Link Learning really allows you to support students more effectively than you could if you're just, a traditional comprehensive high school. So it's really, you see where it all starts to connect. I'm going to turn it to Jasmine, who's a junior in the Law and Social Justice Academy, and we love Jasmine. I would just love to hear from you what your experience has been like being at Oakland High in this space where it's a community school and you get these link learning experiences where you're doing project-based learning and work-based learning. What have been, how's it been for you, and how's it benefited your peers?
Well, thank you for having me, and wow, just brain fart automatically. Oh my God. But again, just to introduce myself, my name is Jasmine. My pronouns are she, hers, and like what you said, I am a junior in the Law and Social Justice Academy. But pretty much just my overall experience with Link Learning was pretty cool. They're so nice and welcoming. I know earlier in the beginning of the year, within our pathway, we've done a project talking about defunding and allocating money from the police budget and just to like mental health services and alternatives. And their audience from Link Learning, I loved how they were so open with student input and they were so inviting. They were actually interested in what we had to say too, and they were just in all the full support of what our ideas and just pretty much overall the presentation. But with student support services such as like Link Learning and the Wellness Center, I've been able to get some extra help with academics, test prep, and also with college prep as well. As a junior, I know college is like so overwhelming for me right now. So it's just love getting that extra help and support, but also just constantly seeing new internship and job opportunities every day. Also scholarship opportunities. Fortunately, I just received a scholarship from the Wellness Center with the Basie and the Sung family. So I just feel so happy and grateful about that. And then also just having those opportunities for student voice and input like today. And, just seeing some of my peers, I know they receive jobs. I know they also receive scholarships as well and internships. I've seen like others attend with their families, weekly spaces where to just keep families up to date within the pathways and also with school events. I even hear some of my classmates just attending non-academic stuff like the Wellness Center does, like movie nights and raffles, which is pretty cool. But just overall, that benefit is just networking and building these relationships and connections with your peers and your teachers and staff. And, just because I know for myself, just that social interaction, I just lost so much during the pandemic. Oh, I feel so bad. But I think I should.
Take a quick pause and then come back, Jasmine. It looked like it just cut out for a sec.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay. I see you guys pause. I was like, oh shoot, I did it again. But yeah, I was just saying that overall benefit of just networking and building those relationships with peers and teachers, and just that social interaction that's being built upon again because of it. During the pandemic, I know it's just not the same talking with my friends and all my classmates. And so just having these opportunities and these spaces and workshops where we can build that, that community and that relationship again is really cool. And like what Miss Randy said, with the Wellness Center, I know I can say for myself and a lot of students that the BASI is just like a second family to me. And with the Wellness Center, I can talk to them about anything. I could talk to them about video games and like, Marvel or something like that. So it was just really cool. And these services has been really helpful during my high school journey. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Jasmine, and thank you for being with us here today. And I just want to reaffirm some of the things that Jasmine said. We did a survey last year, with last year's juniors and seniors, and it's really amazing to see how linked learning and this type of the student supports have really kept kids connected during this very, very challenging year. And so I just really appreciate Jasmine speaking to that. Before we move on, I wanted to hear from our Oakland High folks. Given that, so Oakland Unified has initiatives to advance linked learning, has initiatives to advance community schools, I'm wondering how the district can improve the alignment between these approaches and other high schools in the districts. Like you guys have done it really well at Oakland High, but just wondering what can be done more district-wide and in other places that might have both of these approaches in place. And I'll let anybody speak up.
If I may, I believe the big piece that makes us successful is our communication and that community building between all of the people involved. I've heard, like, I've said it, but I didn't say it today. Like, we are very family feel oriented, like we support each other every single time. And that may not be the case as you introduce new people, and it's just building that community, building those relationships, but also building out, like understanding what offerings are there and how they both can support each other. So I think it's that, that community building, that communication piece to really bring the pieces together, because you can bring the pieces there, but if they don't connect and relate and have conversation, the connection may not be a good fit.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to jump in? All right, I'm gonna turn it to Marisa. Actually, just was curious if what struck you during this conversation with the Oakland High panelists from your own research and experience.
Well, thank you. That was so wonderful. I appreciate you all sharing your insights. And one of the things, well, a few things stood out, but one was your knowledge, love, and appreciation for the communities you are working with. I mean, that just stands out. And I think Jasmine's comments really made it clear that she feels known, understood, and cared for within her learning environment. The other thing that I wanted to highlight, and I'm going to pose it as a question, but community schools are neighborhood schools, and I know that linked learning and you all discussed the element of choice that is involved in the implementation of linked learning pathways. So you didn't necessarily speak to it, but I'm wondering how those two things work together when there is choice, yet you're trying to serve the community. So do students have choices just within their community? It is a question, but I also see it as a potential challenge. And so many of your comments today made me think about how those two things might be reconciled. Finally, the other thing that was made clear was the role that the relationships between adults play in your experiences here, how much you are learning from each other and how much you each tap into the knowledge and experiences that you all possess. And that requires local decision making. I mean, and that is clear that you are able to, decisions are made based on your deep knowledge and experiences that you have. And that was just really wonderful to hear. Thank you, Marisa.
Pam, I don't know if you wanted to address the point that Marisa made. I wasn't sure if that was sort of an open-ended question or if there's a response that this would be a good time to, no, okay. Totally fine. And Jeannie, I was wondering, there's a lot of policy and funding opportunities right now for community schools. And so I'm wondering how you think some of that could be used to scale the type of work that's being done at Oakland High and how districts and states can be more intentional in bringing the approaches together and potentially utilizing some of those funds.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I live in New Mexico, and New Mexico actually has a statewide community schools initiative and have learned a whole lot about what it takes. And typically community schools have been thought of as, I think maybe linked learning schools have been thought of as sort of one-offs rather than part of a big system, and that they're very self-generating and self-sustaining, which is wonderful, but it is a whole lot of work. So I say there are three things that states and districts need to think about when they want to scale this. Well, maybe four things. I'll put the first one first is equity, to how to target your scaling in a way that the kids who need, who are less likely to have a rich whole child approach elsewhere in their lives get this first. So I would think first about targeting, but really there are three things. One is resources, as the Oakland High team knows and shows by their presence. This isn't something can be done on the cheap by the typical staff that's at a school. It requires much more investment in human resources and in thinking differently about how you use resources like curriculum materials and all of that. So resources, and so it makes a huge difference when the state says, yes, this is a priority and we're going to provide some funding for it. And I would say my own view is that the funding shouldn't just be grants for startup, but it should be ongoing sustained funding so that you at least have funds for one full-time person or two to keep it going. The second thing is infrastructure. Both community schools and linked learning draw on the kinds of issues and services and interests that go beyond the Department of Education. And so if there's a children's cabinet at the level of the state where people who are interested in workforce issues, in health and human services, and education can figure out ways to pave the way for an integration both of the content of what they do, but also of the resources. One of the things that community schools talk about a lot is blending and braiding. It's okay to use school improvement money from Title I to support your community schools. It's okay to have a partnership. It's great to have a partnership with the health department so you can have school-based health clinics. And I'd say the final The final thing is that people need to, this is an adult learning opportunity, and states and districts really need to provide ways for the adults to learn how to do this. That simply giving a chunk of money to a school doesn't mean that people magically have all the knowledge and skills it takes to put this kind of an approach together. It's very sophisticated, and people need coaches, they need professional development and technical assistance of all kinds. And those are things that districts and states sometimes don't like to do because they prefer the money go right to the schools and the kids. But it's not magic. You gotta learn how to do this well.
Thank you, Jenny. All really great points. And I think the thing that really strikes me in what you're saying is, like, too often our districts or states work, people work in their silos, and they're all well-intentioned, but those silos keep things from actually moving forward in a cohesive, integrated way. And so I always think about, I think one of the things that Oakland does so well is as that wonderful graduate profile. Like, how are you collectively working towards that district level profile of a graduate or that state level in a cohesive, integrated way, instead of having everybody kind of working in their own little silos. And that's a hard thing to break down in education. I did want to raise a question that came through the chat from Carolina. She's a community schools coordinator at a high school that does link learning. Can you share any best practices on getting link learning partners excited about the community schools model? And just wondering if any of our Oakland High panelists might have any ideas or strategies you might share with Carolina.
Does Randy have anything before I jump in?
Go for it, Moy.
I think one of the things that we do well, so we also, as part of being within these pathways, common prep periods, and within these common prep and common planning periods, we invite these partners in to help share what their resources are and how they can help support. And I think it's as the teachers, as the students talk about what they've seen happen, and as it keeps coming back to them, that's really how it hopefully will build that excitement and build that, wait, we can send this child or help this child go here, or build these pieces within. So I think it's inviting everybody into the same spaces, whether it's smaller prep period times or whole school, at least so that everybody at least knows, but just having that space offered.
Thank you. Randy, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways that we've done it here at Oakland High for sure. One is we have monthly all partners meetings, and even though we meet as all partners monthly, there's still work and we still connect outside of those monthly meetings. And these monthly meetings are spaces for community partners, regardless of what your area of profession is to take a deep dive and understand the school population, understand who you're working with, who are our young people, and what are their needs. And so this school year, we looked at data, or every school year we look at data, and the data is a place to help us to reflect around, what's showing up and how do we know, how do we know what are the conditions that we could have an influence on to shift, the data in a way that could support our student population. And so this school year, our partners, our college access partners, our mental health and medical partners, they've decided on wanting to work on two strategies. One is, how do we work with students who are disengaged from distance learning? How do we identify who they are? How do we check in? How do we wrap around those services for them? And the two is also, how do we work with our newcomers, right? This is in-person learning is difficult enough because we don't have, there's a language and cultural barrier there, but now that they have to do distance learning online, it just becomes a lot more challenging for them. And so being able to have these intentional and meaningful conversations and have an action plan and be consistent with how do we reflect on that. The other space is our culture and climate team, which we invite our community partners in to work with our administrators, the case managers, and students to shape and co-create what does a caring and positive school climate and culture looks like.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, as we move into our final Q&A, there's going to be a poll coming up on your screen. Go ahead and fill that out. We'd love to know, for those of you who are in the school pathway or district space, which of the design elements we discussed today do you have in place that you could build on to create alignment between community schools and link learning in your context. So go ahead and fill that out. We'll show the results in a bit. And while you do that, I'd love to share some information about ongoing investments in community schools in the state budget. So you may know that the 2020 Budget Act provided $45 million to support existing community schools programs. And the January budget, the January 21-22 budget proposed by Governor Newsom, includes an investment of nearly $265 million in one-time Prop 98 general funds for community schools. And that can be used to enable local education agencies to expand and establish community schools programs, to coordinate a wide range of services to these schools with a focus on high poverty communities, and to develop new and expand existing models of community schools. So that's really applicable to what we've been talking about today. The governor's May budget revision will probably come out next week and is likely to continue to include targeted investments for student wellness and mental health, as well as community schools. And if you're interested in learning more about community schools funding, Ava is sharing a link in the chat now, and we'll also send the link in a follow-up to our attendees. And I'm just going to take a quick glance at the poll. Looks like a lot of folks have work-based learning in place as well, actually I'll have linked learning in place. Comprehensive wraparound services, relational environments, distributed collaborative leadership. So that's really great. And I just encourage you to think about those foundations you already have in place that you can build on to bring these approaches together. All right. Let's see, are there any other questions? I want to go back to John Watkins. You had a question. I'm going to scroll back up the chat to find it. Give me a sec. All right. So this will be for the panelists. Are you seeing ways that schools or districts are using ARP funds, the federal funds, for advancing this nexus of great practice and approaches? And also, how are California LCAP processes intersecting with the community schools process in practice? So first question is how folks are using the federal funds. And Jeannie, I don't know if you have a perspective on that from where you sit.
Well, I know that in the guidance that's been issued by the Department of Education, there is a reference to community schools as being an appropriate use of the funds, and also a reference to linked learning. Now, the trick is in thinking about it, I would want to think about how you pull those two things together and have a combined rationale for doing a joint project. But I think this is a really, because I think the Brookings Task Force is right. This is a strategy for helping schools recover from the pandemic, and also for moving schools where they should move anyway. So I think having these federal dollars, and of course, one of the things I worry about is that with a lot of federal dollars for recovery, people need really good strategies to spend that money well, to invest it in ways that'll pay off in the long run and won't engender a reaction like, well, we gave them all that money and nothing's different. So I think this is a terrific way to use those funds.
That's right. And I'm just going to ask my team if they can drop in that COVID handbook that references both community schools and linked learning. I think that might be a helpful resource to folks on this. John's other question was how's the the LCAP process in Oakland intersecting with the community schools process in practice? Sort of how do you use your local control accountability to move these initiatives? And Pam, I don't know if you have a perspective on that. You might be more involved than others.
Deep in thought about it. I think as I've been developing my SPSA and looking at LCAP and thinking about how funding sources or funding is applying to these pieces. There is some alignment that definitely does support linked learning and the community school pieces and wellness. We are, focusing on our communities in need. We're focusing on graduation rates, which, absolutely linked learning has helped us increase. We're focusing on reading interventions and, and actually especially with our parent-student relationship, like just making sure that they feel welcome and engaged within our campus. So there is a lot of connection as I think through this question. And, that funding and the initiatives really are aligned in many ways with LCAP.
That's great. Thank you. And I totally didn't realize it's 4 o'clock. So we need to wrap up. I just want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and especially thank our panelists who took the time to share their insights. So let's give them a huge virtual round of applause. And if you get a chance, if you haven't had a runoff, please do fill out the survey. You can either click on the link that Ava is sending out in the chat or take a photo of the QR code on your phone, and it has links. And we always appreciate feedback. There are so many ways to stay connected with us and our work. We have numerous webinars and events coming up, including one this Monday at noon covering Link Learning funding strategies. And then later in May, we are launching our Link Learning Student and Alumni Network, and we'll be hosting our inaugural Fieldwide Symposium and Celebration. So we hope to see you all there. Ava has posted some RSVP links in this chat, and we'll follow up with more information after today, along with the recordings and resources from today's discussion. So thank you again for participating, and hopefully we'll see you all soon, and have a great day.